So all of this hype, all of this investment, all the hundreds of billions of dollars going into these AI data centers, you may not be able to turn them on. You really only have to do three things, right? You have to solve a really big problem and make it low friction, make your solution low friction, build it to be highly replicable and easily scalable. Entrepreneurs, I'd say the common element is that you have to become a learning machine, and you have to be incredibly self-reliant, and you have to have a lot of grit. If we don't fix the medical payment system here, this country will go bankrupt, and Bitcoin's going to go to 10 million if that happens.
Hi, everyone. This is the Tech Surge Deep Tech Podcast presented by Celesta Capital. Each episode, we spotlight issues and voices at the intersection of emerging technologies, company building, and venture investment. I am Sriram Viswanathan, founding managing partner at Celesta Capital. If you enjoy Tech Surge, now is a perfect time to hit the like and subscribe button. And while you're at it, you can leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. If you're just discovering us, visit techsurgepodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter and check out the archive of some very interesting past episodes. Today, we have a very special guest, the legendary technologist and investor Bill Tai, who's been a VC and really investing the last couple of decades his own money, but he's been in other famous Silicon Valley venture firms in his career, and his early investments, personal investments, read like the tech hall of fame that anyone would die to be part of. And that is, you're the first backer of Zoom. You were the first or early investor in Canva.
Put that team together.
You put the whole team, Melanie Perkins, and the whole team together. And you were an investor in TweetDeck even before Twitter became what it became, and Twitter acquired TweetDeck, Cotopaxi and Dapper Labs, and tons of other things that you've done. You're a big pioneer in also crypto. In fact, I just pinch myself when you tell me what your entry price on Bitcoin is, which we can talk about. You're the chairman of Hut 8 Mining, which is one of the largest crypto mining company in the U.S. And I also want to actually, go back in time and talk about your early days as a technologist when you originally started at LSI Logic. And in fact, you have this incredible badge, which I want to spend some time on, and that is employee number 1 badge at TSMC, which is pretty stunning given what TSMC is today. And you worked at TSMC, and of course before that you were at Alex Brown as an analyst, and so really truly just a remarkable wealth of experiences and ringside view of so many great innovations, and you've been part of and helping create. So Bill, it's truly a pleasure, an honor to talk to you, and I consider you as a dear friend, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Honored to be here. It's always wonderful to interact with you, and amazing to see the success of your podcast as well as your venture firm and everything else you've done.
Well, it's all about the guests.
Yes.
So this one, I think, hopefully will push our podcast further up. So we'll see.
We're going to make it fun.
All right. Okay. So tell us about your day-to-day life right now. You have so many projects. And the one thing that I have not talked about, which I know is your passion, is kiting. So
kiteboarding, yes.
Kiteboarding. So tell us what your day looks like and what do you enjoy doing?
Well, I guess I'm a kind of a health nut. Early to bed, early to rise. I'm usually up with the sun. So somewhere between 5 and 5:30 or 6. I'm usually up. I'll flip on CNBC or Bloomberg, and I always like to be there at the market open because I've got positions in a variety of things, and I like to see kind of what's happening every day. I work out like a fiend, and some people know that I do like literally hundreds of sit-ups and push-ups and pull-ups every day and run 5 miles. And then, interspersed with the workout, I'll basically clear out a bunch of email, answer a bunch of WhatsApp things, and then I'll go for a 5-mile run. And on that run, I set my priorities for the day, and I generally try to narrow it down to getting 3 things done that are important, that will clear out, there are hundreds of things in everybody's, kind of forward view. And I like to distill it down to just, 3 things, get them done. And it eliminates all the forward, other stuff that has to get done get it out of the way.
Where does kiting fit in a day?
It depends on the season. So if it's summer, when it's windy in the Bay Area from kind of May through September, then in the afternoons I'm probably on the water maybe twice a week. If I'm around, I do get a chance to travel quite a bit. This month in May, I'm going to be on Maui. In June, I'll be kiting Paros, Greece. In July, I'll be in Morocco. September, probably Bali. And then December, Perth, Australia.
All right. Well, this is important because this is one of the things that you do, which is a great magnet for young people who are also, as you said, health fiends and, really work out, intensely. But they also happen to, form a little community that you bring together. I know you had this community come together as Mai Tai Global, and
yes,
that was a great fishing ground for great innovative ideas.
Unbelievable.
And collaboration. Talk about that.
I had an annual trip on Maui in May every year with Ken Goldman, a famous tech exec. And that trip somehow just grew and grew. I think there was a magic moment somewhere between 2003 and 2006, and I don't remember when it was. Sergey Brin and Larry Page were taking lessons, kiteboarding in the Bay from a friend of mine. And I think there was a picture in the San Francisco Chronicle. And all of a sudden, every young tech entrepreneur wanted to learn how to kite. And I think I was already well known in that, kind of that little subculture.
Community. Yeah.
And so they started coming to me. So a bunch
Which year was this?
I think that was around 2006. And a bunch of the early Googlers started showing up on Maui with me, and then Employee 13 of Facebook that brought that crowd. And then we seeded Twitter, and some of those people came, and we just ended up with this wonderful community of tech entrepreneurs from all the major companies in the Bay Area that ultimately became a nonprofit. And that it was originally called Mai Tai. It's now evolved over the years. It's become this magic community of athletes, conservationists, technologists, artists, and innovators.
So
ACTI.
ACTI.
Yeah, so the acronym is ACTI, and we hold functions around the world. We do snow kiting in St. Moritz in January. We were on a private island in the Philippines in February, and then, like I said earlier, we have a full schedule where people will meet around the world, entrepreneurs from everywhere, and venture capitalists and corporate people, and it's kind of a hotbed for the sharing of ideas and the formation and funding of startups and the fertilizer upon which seed companies can plant themselves, and sometimes a little funding and rain and sunshine comes down and they turn into companies.
It's funny because I remember you and I talking about it during the time that you were at CRV, I think, when I said to you, "Oh, you're the VC that kites," and you said, "No, I'm the kiter that invests."
Yeah.
So that changed for you at some point.
Well, my handle is Kite VC.
I know.
So, because it kind of fits the lifestyle.
Well, it's metaphorically, I think it's also interesting because you're catching the wave. Symbolically, I think it's really what you're trying to do in these communities when you are actually bring these young entrepreneurs and who are technologists who have passion and some intensity about them, and you're able to sort of, test them on what they are really made of, not just about the technology chops that they have, but, the grit that they have.
Sure.
Is that part of the calculus for you?
Oh, absolutely it is. So essentially when you're riding the gear, and there's many styles of gear and lots of shapes and sizes that affect your ride, wind conditions are highly variable, the kite design and dimensions change everything. So you're essentially processing a giant multivariate equation all the time, and you are effectively failing 99% of the time and course correcting at every moment. And I think what happened is that the type of person that becomes an entrepreneur thrives in that environment. They do not like static, boring, day after day doing the same things. So they're drawn to that kind of a thing. Great entrepreneurs are not people that on a vacation can sit and lay in the sun on a beach. They have to be doing something. So when you capture them at the right, kind of age range, this sport it gives them something that they're kind of used to in terms of stress level, but it's a fun stress, and it unlocks them, and it gives them meditative moments at the same time. Right. And I think, entrepreneurs, I'd say the common element is that you have to become a learning machine, and you have to be incredibly self-reliant, and you have to have a lot of grit. Because like I said, you're basically in a controlled failure sequence 100% of the time, and you're going through all of these baby steps, all these foundational things, just grinding through to get to the point where you can kind of cruise across the water. And you keep splatting and splatting and splatting every day in the hopes that there's that magic moment where you lock and load and you power up and you fly.
Yeah.
And you land.
You're weightless.
Yeah. And, startups are the same thing. You're basically grinding it out every day for long, long periods of time on the brink of death and failure often, hoping for that magic moment where it all comes together. And even if you've got that magic moment under your belt and behind you, you're just going to go into another splat. Yeah. So you have to want to be there, and you have to have the desire and grit and the support system you talk about. And I think, like startups, you can't just read a page of information and get out and kiteboard. Yeah. You can't just read a page of information and start and run a company successfully. You got to talk to people. You've got to build that support network, and you're always constantly interacting and exchanging information and pushing yourself. So I think the underlying kind of fundamentals are perfect.
Yeah. So I want to take you to a very specific investment that you did, which perhaps is, you can draw a lot of lessons from the experience of being a true, hardcore athlete, like the way you're talking about being a kiter. Eric Wan, you're the first investor in Zoom.
Yep.
And here's, to paint the picture, here's a guy who works at Cisco, and Cisco has got, WebEx, I think, at that time.
Yes.
And you have Skype, you have all kinds of other video conferencing related technologies out there in the market. But you decided to back Eric, and which became an explosive company thanks to COVID when everybody was going virtual. So talk to me about, what was that thing that made you think this could be another great idea when you had all these incumbent big companies, like Skype and others who've tried, and they were all very successful at that time. What was the thing that drew you to that?
There was a structural change. And so I think going back to one of the topics you introduced earlier, like what is it I look for? It's a combination of a structural change in a big market as well as the right entrepreneur that can set the right culture and tone, and with enough leadership charisma to build a team. When the cloud was starting to really get traction in kind of the 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10 period, it became apparent to me that that structural change in how bits were ingested and delivered were going to change the economics and the scalability of everything. So somewhere around the 2010 to 13 period, I was funding basically cloud-based things. And
you were doing it more as an individual family office investor by yourself, your own
myself.
money.
Yeah, right. So like funding, Melanie Perkins, design on the cloud as opposed to packaged software at Adobe. I co-founded as an investor a Hadoop on the cloud company called Treasure Data that ultimately SoftBank bought for $600 million down and some earnout, and Zoom, of course, cloud video. And so in discussions with Eric, one of the things that was mind-blowing to me was we had a conversation about the architecture of something like WebEx. And at the time, inside Cisco, he had 13 teams, software teams. And I was like, 13 teams? Why would you have 13 software teams? And he explained to me that when you went to webex.com, he had to auto-detect, one, are you a Mac or a PC? Along those two branches. Are you on Vista 7, 10, Windows 11, which operating system? And same with the Mac, of quite a variety. And then there's a third decision, which browser? Are you Firefox? Are you Chrome? Are you Explorer? What are you and which version? And so there were literally 13 types of WebEx. And so when a call was lit up, somebody would have to light up a server, connect to all these things, and then the system would have to derate everybody to the lowest common denominator, the crappiest PC, the oldest browser. Otherwise, that person couldn't see. So it's scaling limitations. And so if you think about how a cloud architecture could work, as opposed to something like Skype at the time or WebEx at the time, you had to generate, if I had a video call with 5 people on it, my PC had to generate 5 different streams and stick them in through your house at 1.5 megabits uplink, and then redistribute from there, right? So you're jamming all the stuff in. Under the architecture that Eric built for Zoom, you had one hop in, and then if you had 20,000 people on, not just 5, you just lit up multiple servers on the inside of the cloud, and then you could get to the endpoint.
So essentially what you're really saying is that you took the concept of, move the stuff over to the edge, and you sort of reversed it for video conferencing, and you moved all of the disparate support that you have to do onto the cloud, which is far more efficient to do. And is that the primary difference, architecturally speaking, between Zoom and WebEx and Skype?
Yes, architecturally from a big picture, yes.
Yeah.
And then there's codecs.
Yeah, of course.
So he was just...
whatever.
Yeah, Eric had a team of specialists building really just great, superior audio and video codecs to make the system incredibly efficient. Yeah. But, even with the better technology, as we've all learned, the best technology doesn't always win. A lot of it's marketing. And often after I did that seed and tried to get my venture friends interested, the amount of pushback I would get, if I had to paraphrase the common answer and roll it all up into one ball, I'd be like, what the F are you thinking? Yeah. You're going to compete with free products from Microsoft in Skype and Teams and from Google with Hangouts. How do you ever win that battle? And the only other notable private company at the time was Blue Jeans.
Yes, of course.
Which had raised tens of millions of dollars.
This is the Amazon... Amazon bought it.
No, Verizon.
Verizon bought it. Sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah.
But they had raised tens of millions of dollars, and literally every major venture firm had some kind of a bet somewhere in video conferencing that was a loser. So they were all basically conflicted out, and there was no money available from the standard VC crowd. And that first launch that the company did, we managed to get Walt Mossberg to cover it in the Wall Street Journal. And it was a great article, but we had 60,000 downloads, only 20,000 people ever opened it, and 50% never came back. The numbers were awful.
This was which year?
2013.
2013. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had in co-founding Treasure Data, Jerry Yang was one of our backers too. I wrote an email.
Jerry Yang of Yahoo.
Of Yahoo, yes, who has AME Cloud Ventures.
Sure.
And so I sent Jerry a note. Hey, Jerry, you ought to look at this company, Zoom. And then there was one interchange where the engagement numbers, the set of numbers I told you about, were apparent, and he didn't even reply to me. He sent it to one of his associates, I think, to turn it down, and that was Nick Adams. So Nick sent me a note back saying, Bill, the engagement numbers are horrible. Why should we even look at this? And I wrote, I rarely write long emails because it's kind of a waste of, but I literally wrote a 3-page email laying out
the case for it.
Exactly what, and literally everything I wrote in that email happened. It's I talked about the transition from cloud to cloud and mobile, the new form of endpoint that you would need to service. I talked about what the revenue flow was like, the amount of time it would take for people to kind of slough off of WebEx and GoToMeeting, and it played out. Yeah. One of the things that I push on my companies in the kind of the digital interface thing is you really only have to do 3 things right. You have to solve a really big problem and make it low friction, make your solution low friction, build it to be highly replicable and easily scalable. And if you do all of those 3 things against a big problem, you end up with a Canva or a Zoom or any of these companies. If you think about the big companies, that's what they've done. And so I think that approach to virality and low friction onboarding
adoption,
really worked.
Yeah. Talk to me about Canva, because I know that you met Melanie in one of your trips
On a kiteboarding trip,
on a
yes.
kiteboarding trip in Australia.
Yeah.
And talk about that. What happened there?
Yeah, this is, I think, this is one of these things which is a serial set of moments where truth is stranger than fiction. And any one of the things that led to the formation of Canva, if they hadn't happened, the company may not exist. And it's mind-blowing because it's executing so well now. Canva is now the second most used AI application, 1 billion times a month to ChatGPT, ahead of Google and Anthropic and all these other things. And I met her when she was, I think, 23 years old.
Yeah, this is Melanie
Perkins.
In Perth.
In Perth, Australia.
Yeah.
And her business at the time, Fusion Books, she was basically making high school yearbooks out of her mom's living room. And she had dropped out of UWA, was teaching Adobe classes on the side to fund her little company in existence. And she described to me her vision for what the product she wanted to build, that she was trying to build inside Fusion Books. She just said exactly what she wanted, and it's the product that exists today. And after I heard that, because I was so focused on cloud-related things, and there's a second side story I'll get into as to why I like that particular market, but she described it to me, and I said, "Can you build that?" And she said, "No, I'm not technical." And I said, "Well, if you can find a CTO that can build that, I might back you." And then I invited her to come out to California to see my say, and if you ever are in California, drop by. Maybe we can talk about this some more. And so over the next couple of years, it literally took 3 years to put the whole seed together. She eventually did come over to visit me. Actually, she came to visit her brother, and then she sends me a note that she's here to find out. Can you help me find my co-founder? And so she tells a story on the NPR podcast with Guy Raz how we built this.
Yes.
So I'm sitting in a university cafe right on University Avenue. She has a paper pitch deck, and she's going through her thing. She's in a suit, in a white suit, and I don't really wear suits. As you can tell.
Clearly.
Anyway, so she's flipping through this deck with me, and I was using a BlackBerry at the time, and I'm looking down, like typing on my BlackBerry, and she thinks I'm not paying attention. I was making introductions to about 7 people that I thought could lead to a tech co-founder. One of them was Lars Rasmussen, and another one of these crazy truth is
brilliant mind,
but another moment that was truth is stranger than fiction. So
these are strange set of circumstances all coming together. You sitting in, I can almost picture it. You're sitting in University Avenue, sipping your tea, and you got all these people on your fingertips. And this is kind of the support that you're giving people like Eric and Melanie that leads to sort of great outcomes.
Yes.
But did you, at that point, was it more a case of ensuring that you preserve the excitement that Melanie had with sort of, lack of a better word, adult supervision with people like Lars and the other guys to support her? Is that what made the difference in making Canva into what it is? Because today it's like a powerhouse, as you said.
Well, it's always about team, right? I think, Melanie always had the spunk and the grit and what I call healthy disrespect of the system.
Right.
And I think a healthy naivete, because literally the deck that she showed me is exactly what she did. And the competitors she put on there, like, imagine you're meeting a 23-year-old gal from Perth, and she has on her deck that she's going to compete with Microsoft
and Adobe
and Google.
Yeah.
Right.
That's pretty bold.
Very bold, and she didn't have a tech background.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people would have just dismissed that.
Yeah. Because, you're as a seed investor, you really have not much to go with on the business, but just a belief on the founder that is actually saying, I believe this is going to happen, and I'm willing to sort of delayed gratification. I'm going to work my ass off and go with it. Are you with me
Yes.
for that journey is what they're
Yes.
asking you.
Well, and talk about delayed gratification. The Canva journey has already been 15 years.
Right.
And they're not even public yet. It has been profitable for 8 years.
Yeah.
And it took us 3 years to get it off the ground. But maybe it's a 20-year, 30-year ride.
So what's Canva's plan? When do you think it goes public? And
Well, the CFO of Zoom,
Yeah.
4 months ago, joined as CFO of Canva, and she is basically building the financial FP&A, accounting, all that infrastructure to make it completely bulletproof
Yeah.
before they go public. And
Yeah, I think PitchBook or the media would sort of peg it at about $40+ billion already so far. So it's a pretty amazing.
I think it
Sorry.
has a shot of being a centacorn when
fantastic.
it lists. Yeah,
That is
because if you
amazing.
think about a high growth rate, it's still growing 30-40% a year at many billions of revenue.
Right.
Second most used AI application.
It's remarkable. Congratulations on that. That's fantastic.
Knock
Well,
on wood.
knock on wood. Yeah, exactly. I do remember that you and I sitting and talking about Zoom at
Yeah.
the Starbucks on Sand Hill.
Yeah.
And that's one that I missed. But there are others that you and I have had parallel stories about.
Sure.
So let's talk about blockchain and crypto, because as you know, I'm a big believer in blockchain,
Yes.
and I think it has a pretty amazing
Huge
opportunity.
Great company in Ordyne that you've put together.
Right, Ordyne is remarkable, and they're powering the next generation infrastructure for AI
Yeah.
and also for crypto and all of that.
They're all related.
They're all related. But I want to go back to, because I know that you wrote a very insightful article about just the financial system and the whole notion of decentralized ledger. Talk about that, because I think whether it's Bitcoin or Ether or whatever, that almost doesn't really matter. You have to buy into this basic notion of the decentralized nature
Yes.
of the web.
Yeah.
And that has some profound implications as how inference gets done in a
Yeah.
decentralized way. So tie that together for me.
In 2010, I stumbled upon Bitcoin. And there's a tweet out there, which I can also
I
link to.
remember that. I think that tweet would be a good tweet to show.
Oh, man.
You bought what, 10 cents?
7 cents.
7
And
cents Bitcoin.
So I started to, try to find ways to get involved, and I was looking for people to, kind of transact with or what have you. And so I tweeted out
Yeah.
to Twitter sphere,
Yeah.
is anybody using this P2P, currency, Bitcoin? It has fascinating potential. And that started my journey into the whole,
Crypto.
Bitcoin thing.
Did you see the connection between what Bitcoin infrastructure or blockchain as an infrastructure
Absolutely.
and how that could actually, become relevant in the world of AI? And if so, how?
It's the AI part didn't come till a little bit later.
Yeah.
In the beginning, I think because of the debt levels of the United States, even in 2008, 9, 10, that led me to instantly gravitate to the kind of the starting concept of Bitcoin as a store of value. Now, at the beginning of Bitcoin, I think people thought it would be an easily transactable universal currency, and it actually was in the beginning. People could just, there were many apps in the iPhone App Store before they got banned, where you could just send people Bitcoin back and forth, and people could use it as a currency. But I think because of the the pushback from the government, starting around 2013, there was just this crazy clampdown. I had funded a couple companies where they'd be operating, and then one day they couldn't make payroll because the money was frozen.
Yeah.
And then we were getting notices saying, I'm sorry, we are not debanking. This term debanking.
This is debanking.
Yeah, you're not allowed to, or we found out you're a crypto company, and so I'm sorry, but your account is frozen, and you're going to have to take your money out and go elsewhere. And it was just, mind-blowing that you couldn't operate these companies because of government policy. But as we started to build Bitfury, many of the things...
Bitfury was a mining equipment hardware company.
Yes.
And they were also holding Bitcoin on their balance sheet.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And they were mining it purely as a as a business to sort of,
to build piles of Bitcoin.
Piles of Bitcoin.
Basically.
And they were not really, doing more stuff in terms of trying to move to a transactional model and become more of a financial services company, or were they?
There were, I think it was so early at that time, and we had our hands full doing, designing silicon, building servers, building data centers, and running them at very high performance levels. So Bitfury did a lot of things that are now, really just now, 10 years later, 12 years later, coming into the mainstream. So we had immersion cooling tanks running to the whole circuit boards or the innards of their custom compute devices immersed in fluid that was electrically non-conductive but thermally very conductive.
It's like a dielectric of some sort. Right?
Yeah, we had those running 10 years ago. And so a lot of the things to do with ultra high density delivery of electricity, ultra powerful cooling technology. Those things were running in the Bitcoin mining companies 10 years ago.
But this is the important part as it relates to AI and inference in the data centers, because one of the biggest costs in the data center, as you well know, is energy.
Yes.
And to the extent that you can drive the energy utilization much lower with much better cooling and all of that is, pretty significant. Now, bridge this back to Hut 8, because you started Hut 8 also.
Sure.
And you're the chairman of it. And more interestingly, I want to understand, now with this new administration, obviously the U.S. Bitcoin Corp has been created, and Hut 8 is recently announced a merger, and you're very actively involved in Washington. So talk about, what is that all about?
Well, okay, so Hut 8 started as a unit of Bitfury.
Yeah.
Okay, so back even, it doesn't seem that many years ago, but 2018, the Bitcoin mining companies still didn't have access to public capital easily.
Correct. Right? Some would argue even today. I mean, there's not that much capital available for, public capital available.
It's a hard, because it's a cyclical. It had been a more cyclical business. That cycles are starting to even out a little bit like semiconductors.
Sure, which we talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, I told the guys at Bitfury, I said, this is a lot like the DRAM business. If you remember Micron Technology, like a public company in the early '80s, and because the production capacity is constrained, when the demand went up, the prices of memory would go like this, and Micron stock would go to the moon, and then the Japanese would build another couple plants, and then overproduction, and then it'd be negative. So the Bitcoin mining industry had those characteristics in the early days. It's a little steadier now because it's bigger, but there were no public companies, and raising private capital was hard because you had this sort of religious separation of either you believed or you didn't believe.
Yeah.
And you could either just buy Bitcoin or you could invest in the miners that could make it at a little bit of a discount if the cycle was right, or make it at a big discount if you were at the right part of the cycle. So it was hard to get capital, and so we took one division of Bitfury, which was Bitfury Canada, and we carved it off, and we took it public as Hut 8, and that's
the miner.
That was the beginning of Hut 8, and then we ultimately, I think 5 or 6 years ago, we were NVIDIA's single largest customer in Canada for GPUs, because we were using those to do crypto mining of Ethereum, which we would then convert immediately to Bitcoin. Because you could run either Bitcoin dedicated miners or run GPUs. And we started to get exposed to the world of high performance computing with ultra good cooling technologies and lots of things that people call, HPC, high performance compute. We bought a web hosting company that was primarily, the customer base was primarily game companies that did rendering. So we were using GPUs for that. And we started to build a little AI unit. And over the years, I think what and then we merged with another Bitcoin mining company called US Bitcoin. That got folded into Hut 8. And more recently, you always, as a venture person, you want to move to, it's kind of like that hockey phrase,
puck,
right?
Where the puck is going.
Yeah, you go to where the puck is going, not where it is now. And so what I see and our team sees is that the shortage is going to be electricity.
Yeah.
And I'll touch on some of that with comments from Eric Schmidt. But so what we have today is a world where right now, okay, this is Eric Schmidt's wording, which I think he's on the high side of estimates. He testified in Congress, and I think he said that today data centers use about 3% of America's energy. If all the data centers that have been announced by end of 2027 are built, it'll be 97% of America's energy. If you want to service that need, we need 27 gigawatts, which is 27 nuclear power plants. In 2 years. If you want to go to 2030, the data center build then gets to an incremental 63 gigawatts. So you need 27 nuclear power plants in America in 2 years, 63 more in the next 3.
It's unsustainable.
It's a high side. So all of this hype, all of this investment, all the hundreds of billions of dollars going into these AI data centers, you may not be able to turn them on. So we got to solve the electricity thing. And so I don't know if Eric's estimates are right. I see lower estimates that make sense to me too. If the data centers that are announced to be built in the next 5 years are built according to more conservative estimates, that's 40 million American homes on a base of about 100 million American homes. So what I see happening is that we have to do something. The economics and the incentive system in the power industry resemble the economics and incentives of the phone industry in the 80s.
When you had to build the infrastructure, when you didn't have the devices, there were not enough people buying, mobile handsets or whatever, but you had to pour in billions of dollars into building the radio infrastructure.
And
even the telecommunications infrastructure.
The landline infrastructure. And so the method for
But this is probably an order of magnitude larger
I
than
think
that,
so.
Right?
I think so. And so the old system in the USA, for people that are old enough to remember, there was only one really big land phone company, AT&T. The Telecom Act basically cut that apart into a long-distance carrier, which was still AT&T, that could charge you $1.10 a minute for long-distance calls, and a bunch of regional Bell operating companies. So here it was Pac Bell, there's Ameritech in the Midwest, Southwestern Bell covering the Southwest, all these different little baby bells. And it also provisioned the creation of competitive local exchange carriers,
CLEX,
and ILEX, and also competitors in the long distance area. So you might remember pictures of trains running with diggers, along trenchers to lay fiber.
So you're drawing the analogy to the AI infrastructure, coming back to that kind of a build out that happened in the old telecommunications area?
Now there's several layers to the AI infrastructure. So of course the power part is foundational. There's going to be the data center builds themselves. There's the training model of thousands of GPUs in clusters, and I think there's going to be an edge network too, which we'll talk about. But I think the power thing is fascinating because I think without the Telecom Act, the world that we know today with internet wouldn't exist. So there was this big switch from circuit switching to packet switching, which allowed the dumb
IP traffic to go.
Yes, and dumb telephone lines suddenly became a context-aware cloud, where the network itself had awareness of all of the endpoints and how to route traffic between any 2 points at any time with resiliency. So I think the power grid has to become that too, because we've got now a structural change from what used to be a centralized set of power sources pushing to the edge. Now on all the endpoints, you might have solar, wind, hydro. There's all kinds of different things now that are now flowing back in, and a variety of endpoints with loads that go like this. Very recently, there was a massive several nationwide blackout in Portugal, Spain, parts of France, right? That was caused because you didn't have the right frequencies. You need a carrier frequency, basically, and then all the other things have to ride along with that. When you have a distributed network, which we need to have to handle the generation, you have all kinds of, you need load balancing, you need synchronization, and you need that context-aware cloud. And the word LLM applies to language and words, so it doesn't really apply to electrons per se, but I think there needs to be something like an energy LLM, but it's not called an LLM.
This is actually fascinating because I think most of the conversation around data center and AI inference centers around compute,
Yes.
and it centers around the language models and how large they're going to be and how efficient, token dollar per token per user per megawatt or per kilowatt that you can deliver. But it never really talks about this analogy that you're making, which is the telecommunications infrastructure really drove the internet, and today the energy infrastructure is woefully behind.
Yes.
So do you see a regulatory framework in the works in Washington that
I
can actually
am
drive
working
this?
on that in background with
Yeah.
some people that were advisors to the Trump 1 administration that
Yeah.
are not in the administration now.
Yeah.
But I think there, I have so many wacko concepts. So if you think about so back to cryptocurrency
Yeah.
and Bitcoin and other things like that. If you think about the nature of the U.S. dollar today, and it has the name the petrodollar.
Yeah.
Why is that, right? So if you think about societal constructs and money, what is money? Money is basically stored productivity. If you produce more than you consume, you have this chit. And depending on what form it is, you can trade that because you stored your productivity for something else, right? So it's really stored excess productivity. Before oil and machinery in the first industrial revolution really took a hold of this economy, you basically had tribal little pockets of economic development and not a lot of stored excess productivity because it was human labor based. Once you got machines running on oil, the productivity model changed a lot. And you suddenly had machinery in which you could pour a bunch of oil to turn it into marginal productivity.
Yeah.
And so oil became the source of incremental productivity. So nation states, to preserve their economic future, needed to store oil. So you can look at the US dollar as a token.
Yeah.
It's a petrodollar, right?
Yeah.
Okay, now we're in a world where the productivity model has changed completely because oil's pervasive now, but all marginal productivity comes from this.
Yeah.
It's software, it's electrons. So we're now in a world where because all productivity is moving to electrons, Bitcoin is stored productivity. So is, all of the things that we're working on, they all rely on that. So I think we're going through a foundational change where the nature of stored productivity and currency are flipping.
Yeah. It's interesting you make that analogy because I think in a sort of a parallel model, if you were to trace the evolution of the value creation that's happened as a result of technology, you could make the comment that it was compute. There was lots of value that got created because of compute as the driver of the value
Absolutely
creator.
the case.
And then there was a phase when there was lots of community-related value creation, social media, networking, all of that. And then now we seem to be
This is
entering
the
into
combination of the two.
now we seem to be entering into the third phase where cognition or inference,
Yep.
we can call it any number of things, but it's cute to have 3 C's,
Yep.
compute, community, cognition,
Right.
as the methodology for value creation.
Yes.
And it almost sort of parallelly, reflects on what you're talking about,
Yeah.
which is, at the end of the day, it's productivity. And,
Yeah.
Instead of looking at Bitcoin as a another, fancy little, cryptocurrency, what you're really coming to grips with is that this is a model that actually can reflect how people, trade with each other, conduct
Accelerate your productivity.
accelerate productivity,
and the
store your
excess you store it.
productivity, and really use
Yeah.
it for inference and all kinds of things. So this is all pretty fascinating. So I know that you're now, as part of HUD 8, you're working closely with the Trump administration, or at
Yeah.
least one of the Trump sons. So can you say anything more about it?
Yeah, so what that's about is given all the talk we just had about energy. Okay, so, electrons, chips, servers, data centers, I kind of wrote all those waves. Now it's the expression of the data centers, which is either Bitcoin or things like, digital asset, production and record keeping, which is the production of Bitcoin is really a function of storing the information of all the transactions, right? It's kind of a distributed database, and that's the output to pay for that function. Separately, there's the AI data center. So what we're doing with Hut is we're making Hut into an energy infrastructure company. People may not know that last year the best performing stock on the market was not NVIDIA. It was Vistra.
Vistra, yes.
Which is an energy company.
Right.
And so as I think about what's happening now, you got to go to where the puck is going. Yeah. So I'm and the team are moving to where the shortage is. We effectively want to become kind of Vistra without the CapEx.
Yeah.
Okay, so Hut is becoming an energy company with two subsidiaries. One is a Bitcoin mining operation. One is a GPU data center company. The Bitcoin mining operation, 20% of it was taken by the Trump affiliates of Donald Jr. and Eric.
Yeah.
And they had a little data center company that they had set up, so we put those together. That is going public separately as American Bitcoin Corp.
Yeah.
It's going to be doing, we took all of our mining assets, stuck them in there. That's going to be a separate company. It's going to raise a ton of capital.
I can imagine.
And it's going to do both some mining, but also the MicroStrategy play. So it's going to buy a bunch of Bitcoin and manage treasury and acquire with other financial instruments to pile up the Bitcoin. The data center company, that's called Highrise.ai. That started with about 1,000 H100s, and we're now going to turn that into a separate entity that ultimately will get spun off and taken public too. Hut 8 has gone from about a year ago, we had about 600 megawatts running with about a gigawatt in the pipeline. We're now at 1.3 or 4 gigawatts running with around 12 gigawatts in the pipeline.
Wow.
12 nuclear power plants worth.
Wow.
So we can,
what's the blended cost of power that you see steady state as you build to scale?
I'd have to calculate that because there's many different sites, but the idea is basically we have managed contracts to provide the electricity and managed services to both of those units. And so the Bitcoin mining stuff will be able to basically light up parts of our little grid, cover the costs with the Bitcoin mining, and then as we develop more and more customers and infrastructure on the GPU side, then we can transition them off.
Understand.
Yeah, so and it's a fascinating world. You mentioned this, cognition thing.
Yeah.
So when I look at this world, it's sort of like, Google organized the world's information.
Right.
And it was the organization of the information to make it readily accessible that was one thing.
That created the value. Yeah.
Yes. Now we're moving from access to information to access to knowledge.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the abstraction layer above that. Yeah. And that obviously comes from all these GPUs.
Yeah.
So I think, the productivity model, stored productivity in Bitcoin, and then the knowledge base and the access to that will have high value. And I think that's what we want to do.
This is great. Let's get back to the last section, pretty much where you started. You started your career at LSI.
Yeah.
Deep roots in semiconductors. And as I noted in the intro, you have the badge number 1 at TSMC. So tell us that story.
Yeah. So Woody Allen, there's a quote attributed to Woody Allen. I don't know if he actually said it, but it's like 80% of life is just showing up.
Yeah.
And so I use that phrase, but I also say, but you have to show up at the right place at the right time. And I don't know how I have that instinct, but somehow I'm showing up at the right place at the right time. It's happened like many times in a row. So the LSI Logic story is fascinating, even to me. It's like one of these happy accidents where, so my dad was a PhD chemist, and he ran research for an alcochemical company. He had 26 patents, just kind of a very inventive guy. Our house was like what you would imagine, like the kid in the Back to the Future lived. We had like all kinds of junk in the house, and the basement was full of things. And he did tell me, he said, the thing about you is I don't know if I should buy you birthday presents anymore because I buy you something and you don't play with it. You take it apart. Yeah. And I couldn't always put it back together, but, I always wanted to see how things work.
That's one way to ensure that you keep getting new things.
That's true. But when I was about 9 years old, he bought me a Radio Shack 100-in-1 electronic projects kit. People don't even know Radio Shack now because it went out of business, but it's basically a wooden box with a piece of cardboard with a bunch of springs, resistors, capacitors, a relay, all kinds of little parts, and a book. each of the springs on the board had a number, and the book had these instructions like connect wire 6 to wire 10, wire 11 to wire 15, and then you could basically make a transistor radio, or you could make really anything, of these 100 kits. So I built that. I built lots of things with that, that was my exposure to electronics. And somewhere around 7th grade, I read an article called Secrets of the Little Blue Box. And you can still find that. You should link to that too.
Yes.
And it's the story of Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak in their first company. They didn't make computers. They made a little frequency synthesizer. Unbeknownst to most people, except for this guy named John Draper, who now lives in Las Vegas, who's a friend. He goes by the handle Captain Crunch.
Yep.
Wacky. In a Captain Crunch cereal box, there was a plastic whistle that blew a frequency of 2,600 hertz. If you blew that into a payphone at the end of an 800 number call and could get everyone else to hang up, you could control the switching system and make calls anywhere in the world for free. So a bunch of kids from MIT
that is so funny.
and other places created this hacker network that would basically trade designs on these little things called phone freaking devices or blue boxes. That was their first business. So Jobs and Wozniak made those things, sold them until they got arrested. And it's somehow Ma Bell got the law to say that's illegal. And so they gave up and started a computer company. But that got me interested in electronics. I ended up with a double E degree. Somehow I ended up at Texas Instruments my junior year. I used to do contract work to pay for school. And I got put on this project during the Reagan administration where I think somebody saw the movie Firefox, or maybe Firefox came after, I'm not sure. But they had built, because TI had Speak and Spell, and they had these DSP things. They were the leader in that area. Somebody had built a 7-board computer system that would take your voice, digitize it, store it in memory banks, and then in real time you could say something to it. It would compare it across all those 40 patterns and then match it and then put output signals. But this was like 2 desktop PCs in one box, and they wanted to shrink that into a 2x4x6 cartridge for the F-16 so you could fly it by talking to it. And so I got assigned to that project. And so through that, in 1983, I found a bunch of startups because big companies, TI couldn't do it. And so there were California Micro Devices, you probably remember them.
Of course.
There was AMI Gould, there was LSI Logic, and VLSI Technology. And so I got exposed to LSI Logic, and then I joined them. And so, and crazy enough, Jensen was there too, Jensen Wang.
That's right.
So yeah, Jensen.
And you're actually related to both Jensen and
Yes,
Lisa.
yeah, crazy. We're all from Kaohsiung. Our parents are all from Kaohsiung, Taiwan. Yeah, which is totally wacko. But so LSI Logic was started by the CEO of Fairchild Semiconductor, from which Intel, National, AMD all came out. National's VP of Sales was Don Valentine.
Yeah.
One of the guys that split out,
iconic investor, Sequoia.
started Sequoia.
Sequoia.
Yeah. So, and then Tom Perkins, who teamed up with Gene Kleiner, Tom Perkins and Don Valentine, and IVP funded LSI Logic.
Yeah.
So I ended up joining IVP through the 90s before taking time off to kite and then CRV. Don Valentine was on the board along with Tom Perkins, and he was my early mentor. So back to the very beginning of your podcast about what do I look for, this is from Don Valentine. So I was at a board meeting with him, at a dinner after a board meeting. It's a very young man, and I said to Don, Don, how do I get good at this? And he said, there's only 3 things you have to get right.
In a classic Don Valentine's way of speaking,
Very
if I might add.
Tight, yes. Yeah. There's only 3 things you have to get right. Markets, management, don't overpay.
Yeah.
If you do those 3 things right, you'll make money every time. But if you get the market wrong, doesn't matter who your team is. You can have the best team in the world and infinite capital, and you will lose money every time. So over the years, that led to me looking for big markets undergoing structural change. Got to get that right kind of gritty founder that's going to go through everything.
The 23-year-old from Perth, as it were.
There it is, you know.
Or Eric Wan, or people like that.
And then you set the right culture with them, and you just build.
But wait, you still didn't tell me how you ended up getting the TSMC one.
Yeah, so this is wacky too. Like another one of these things. I was I was just finishing Harvard Business School, and I was reading EE Times in my cube. So I worked. I didn't stop working. I still held my job when I was at Harvard. Wilf Corrigan, we had an office in Waltham serving all the mini computer companies. I had a WISE terminal connected to our mainframe in my dorm room, and I kept working at LSI Logic, but I had this cubicle. I'm looking at EE Times, and I see this thing that the country wants to start semiconductor industry.
Back in Taiwan.
In Taiwan. And I'm Taiwanese by heritage.
Yep.
And I hadn't been there for a while, and I was like, that might be kind of fun.
Going back from TI. And
Yeah. He was running something called like the National Science Council.
That's right.
And they had built Hsinchu Science Park that was kind of empty. Nobody was really using it. And the government had allocated some budget to incentivize companies to come in. And a lot of the companies in Taiwan that were electronics makers, so UMAX, MyTac, Acer, all were asking for money to build little fabs. And Morris, given his background at TI, he's a guy that thinks scale. He said, it's dumb to have $10 million fabs. Let's build one big one. And so he hired Jim Dykes, who had been president of GE RCA Semiconductor, to come in and kind of figure all that out. And then I contacted the reporter from EE Times, sent Jim my resume, and next day I was on a plane. And
back to Taiwan.
Back to Taiwan, and I did a market study for them to try to figure out how big do we make a fab. And the plan that I kind of centered on was a 60,000 5-inch wafer a month factory to be built in 4 15,000 wafer start modules.
Sounds very quaint now, doesn't it?
Unbelievable. Well, this is in an era where 2 micron was state of the art, you know?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so that, anyway, so they gave me this little contractor badge, and that's a TSMC
that's
badge.
That's the number one TSMC
A001.
badge. Yeah, A001.
Yeah,
we should put it up on the link as well.
Yeah.
But listen, Bill, this is such a fascinating conversation. I think you've just covered such a breadth of topics. I can keep talking to you about, so many anecdotes and stories, and we have lots of common friends, and, we've been ringside views of many of these trends that have happened. But I have to ask you a few real rapid fire questions as we close this. So what is the one startup that you wish you had invested, but you didn't?
In the early 90s.
I assume that by asking that question, I obviously imply that you had the ability to do it.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, everybody did. So Steve Jobs ran out of money in the
Yes.
early 90s because he had Next Computer.
Correct.
Sold all his Apple stock except the share, and then and also bought Pixar from Lucasfilm.
Yep.
He went looking for money, and everybody turned him down, including me.
Yeah.
But Pixar would have been an amazing one. He
Pixar
did
would have
invite me later to the premiere of Toy Story,
That's a good one.
just to
Yes.
shove it up my behind.
Yeah, Pixar that's a great story. All right, so Bitcoin, you've been a bull of Bitcoin for a long time. 2030 it is. Your prediction for Bitcoin price?
5 years from now, it's going to be around $1 million a coin.
Okay, all right. Well, many people will be happy, and there are lots of companies that are working in that area that you and I are involved with will be extremely happy.
Yep.
TSMC or NVIDIA, which is more critical to the future of tech?
Whoa, that's a tough one because arguably NVIDIA could not exist without TSMC.
True.
TSMC could exist without NVIDIA. But the future of what society and technology looks like is probably more a function of both of them surviving, but dependency on NVIDIA delivering.
And the next technology trend that you think is being highly overlooked today?
That's a tough one. I don't know that it's overlooked, but I think it's underrepresented and underrated, which is the intersection of generally AI and semantic AI in particular and healthcare. So we're in a world now where, in a country now, where 19% of GDP here is healthcare. CEOs of insurance companies are getting executed. That tells you something,
that tells
right?
you something.
You know, and this country, the expenses around Medicare and Medicaid are so over the top that even without the issues that we have with interest on the national debt being greater than the defense budget or Social Security getting out of control, if we don't fix the medical payment system here, this country will go bankrupt. And Bitcoin's going to go to 10 million if that happens. But but I think AI and healthcare, it's transformational.
Yeah. Finally, your ultimate kiteboarding destination.
I have to say Western Australia is
for more reasons than one.
It's just awesome. I mean, the variety there, it's like, so Australia in general, it's a beautiful, unpopulated country. The landmass is about the same as the continental United States. There's only 27 million people there. There's 40 million or 35 million in California. Yeah. It's just empty except for a few places, right? And I think only 6% of the population of Australia lives out on the west, 40% of the landmass. The coast, up and down.
It's unbelievable.
Unbelievable. We get out of the airport in the northern part up there. We had a car. We rent this car. We're leaving the airport. We had to stop because there was a giant flock of emus.
Oh my God!
That wouldn't move. And there's dingoes and kangaroos and whale sharks in the water, and you see turtles, like sea turtles breeding. Like there's like hundreds of them. It's just it's transformational to be there.
Well, Bill, this has been just a remarkable conversation. I've enjoyed every bit of it. You are just not just an amazing technologist, you're a great storyteller. You have all of these anecdotes, and you seem to, and I think you summarized it well. Somehow you seem to be finding the right way to be in the right place at the right time, and it's a remarkable journey. And I'm really thankful for you to have shared that with us. So thank you so much for being at the podcast.
Thank you for having me. And don't forget, in the word fund, there's 3 letters, F-U-N.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's fantastic. Thanks, Bill. Thank you for tuning in to the Tech Surge podcast from Celesta Capital. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it, subscribe, or leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. We'll be back every 2 weeks with more insights and discussions of all things deep tech. Bye for now.